University of Illinois Extension, I'm Todd Gleason.
In August, you announced, in fact, that we do have a changed, again, adapted, this time to BT Western corn rootworm, mostly in the northern and northwestern parts of the state of Illinois. Producers will be in the field now in those parts of the state harvesting corn. What should they be looking for in terms of the western corn rootworm?
Well, as farmers roll through their fields during this harvest, they're going to see, undoubtedly, in some areas of fields, lodged corn, maybe significant areas of lodged corn in some cases. That's usually an indicator that rootworms have been hard at work during that summer, feeding on root systems and compromising the integrity of that root system, setting the stage for plants to lodge more significantly. I should add, in some cases, lodging isn't always 100% confirmation that rootworms were at work. In some cases, you might have had soil compaction, shallow root systems, storm activity, high winds can often cause lodging as well. But when you have storms and significant root pruning by rootworms, that's usually a point where plants will begin to topple over. And oftentimes, producers don't notice that rootworm injury until they're on the seat of their combines, out there in their fields, and then they notice, hey, I've got, pretty significant patches of corn that are down, that are lodged. They may want to. I know harvest is a busy time, but they may want to take a closer look. Not an ideal time to look for rootworm injury. Sometimes it's difficult because of root rot that may have set in. But in some cases, you can still tell that rootworms have been at work. So maybe a good point to pause, maybe take a break and see what those root systems look like.
I take it that means getting a spade out of the pickup truck and digging some roots.
That's right. Going back and just popping a few of those roots out and knocking the soil off and see what does that root system look like? What level of pruning is there? And then you need to begin asking yourself some questions. How long have I been maybe in continuous corn, which we know has been very popular in recent years? What trait did I use? Have I been using that same BT trait for many years? How's it been performing? Have I seen this lodging before? Is it time to switch to another trait? They need to begin asking themselves those kinds of questions. Should I possibly use a non-BT hybrid at some point, along with a soil insecticide? I think those are the questions they need to have with their seed industry representative, making sure they understand fully, are they in an area where rootworm resistance has been confirmed? Has it been confirmed for the type of BT trait that they've been using? They need to go into 2013 a lot more informed, certainly, than maybe they have been in recent years, where they've just assumed automatically, I've got a rootworm BT hybrid out here that's going to take care of this problem.
So the trait they're looking at is not Herculex and not one of the yield guards, but it is one of the yield guards.
Right. The trait is basically the hybrids that express the Cry3BB1 protein. This is a type of protein that first entered the marketplace going back to 2003 on a very limited basis, but certainly by 2004, it was the trait that's been out there for the longest period of time. It's the trait that had been expressed in the Yield Guard lineup of products, marketed by Monsanto primarily, right? And it's a trait that started out, I think, working pretty well, but now we know that in some areas of the Corn Belt, last year Iowa State was able to confirm resistance in some fields in northeastern Iowa. And then last summer, in some counties in Illinois, specifically Whiteside and Henry, adults were collected from some of these problem fields where, again, producers had been in continuous corn. They had relied upon hybrids that expressed that Cry3BB1 protein for many years. That in and of itself, even though there was severe root injury and lodging, that in and of itself does not prove resistance. So, you collect the adults as we did, run their offspring through bioassays. Iowa State was able to cooperate with us on that. And again, the results mirrored those that they had reported a year earlier. So that tells us that the rootworm population up in some areas of northwestern Illinois, north central Illinois is evolving. It's adapting to this protein. So producers need to be made aware of that and make some intelligent choices when it comes to rootworm management for 2013.
The western corn rootworm has proven adept at adapting to practices that farmers deploy to control it. BT technology, though, has been around for other insects for much longer, since 1995-96 for the European corn borer, only since 2003 in wide use, acceptable field use that is, for western corn rootworm. What's the difference? Why has the European corn borer not found a way to adapt?
Well, that's a very good question, and you're absolutely right. The BT technology for corn borer and other lepidopterans has been in the marketplace since the mid-90s. So one would think that some of those lepidopterans would have been the first. But there are some critical differences. First of all, the BT hybrids that are used for European corn borer and other lepidopterans, these are high-dose events. So that when European corn borer larvae are feeding on those hybrids, a very high percentage of those European corn borers die. And that's why, producers have been very pleased with that technology because it is so very, very effective. When we have conducted fall corn borer surveys, for many, many years, we eventually stopped doing that because, again, these are so high dose, it's hard to find survivors out in these fields. So that's one reason. The BT hybrids for corn rootworms are low to moderate dose events, so there are survivors out there every year. Secondly, the refuge strategy for European corn borers, as it turns out, tends to work pretty well when you have high dose events. We think of the 20% structured refuge. That might be a separate field, that might be a separate block in a field. But because of the biology and the way corn borers mate and disperse, that biology works very well for that 20% structured format. We now know that for corn rootworms, that kind of structured refuge really doesn't work all that well because of the way rootworms mate and their dispersal patterns. We know that a seed mixture approach, the so-called refuge in a bag approach, is probably a preferred refuge management strategy when it comes to corn rootworm biology and dispersal patterns. So those would be the two primary reasons, the way we deploy a refuge with those high-dose events. As it turns out, that works very well for corn borers, but not as well for corn rootworms.
Refuge in a bag, you mentioned, works better for western corn rootworm. Does that work okay at the 10% level, at the 5% level? Does it need to be more? Those are the two levels that are available at this point.
Well, unfortunately, if we could hit the reset button, then I think we'd have to look at, these different levels, these reduced levels of refuge, 5, 10% from where we had been with 20%. But in areas where resistance has been confirmed, say some of these fields in northeastern Iowa or northwestern Illinois, the concern is by going back into those areas where resistance has been confirmed to drop the refuge from what had traditionally been 20% down to 5 or 10%. There are still some concerns that are out there, even though that seed mixture approach is a preferable resistance management strategy for corn rootworms. So I think there are still some concerns out there by a number of entomologists in terms of lowering that refuge.
If I farm in one of the areas that has been impacted by the western corn rootworm that has changed and adapted to BT and the yield guard technology, whether that be in one of those counties or in this past year in a place that I'm just fairly certain that's the case, should I use a refuge in the bag with stacked BT technologies, which is probably the only way you're going to find it, in combination with a soil insecticide?
Well, In making a decision, if you're not going to rotate, you're going to stay with corn. I mean, my first preference has been, to encourage producers to try to break this cycle by utilizing a more diversified rotation plan, introduce soybeans back into the mix. But if they're not going to do that, they're going to stay in continuous corn. Then I've suggested that, one other possible alternative is to use a non-BT hybrid along with a soil insecticide. But again, if a producer elects not to do that because of some interest in a particular hybrid that has been very productive in their particular field and has very high yielding capability, okay, then to use a pyramided BT hybrid, one that expresses the Cry3BB1 protein that we've talked about, where resistance has been proven in some areas, along, let's say, with the Cry3435 AB1, the Herculex protein. That pyramided hybrid alone should provide adequate, good to excellent protection when it comes to corn rootworms without having to add a soil insecticide on top of that. Now, my concern with the use of those pyramided hybrids in areas where resistance has been confirmed is that, in effect, you have really one protein, the 3435, that's working to provide the rootworm protection. And keep in mind, it's being used at a reduced refuge level, not the 20% that we've had historically, but now down to a 5% level. And what does that say? What does that mean? Well, it means you're putting a lot of selection pressure on that Cry3435 AB1 protein. And as it turns out, that 3435 AB protein is a pivotal protein in a lot of the hybrids that we have out there right now. And we'd sure hate to lose that particular protein. And in fact, last year, or earlier this year, I should say, in March of 2012, when entomologists, 22 entomologists sent a letter to US EPA, one of the primary concerns in that letter was just that we may be compromising the durability, the long-term durability of that Cry3435 AB1 by using even pyramided hybrids in those areas where resistance has been confirmed. So that's a lingering concern and challenge for the industry and for producers and for entomologists working on this insect.
Thank you, Mike.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
Mike Gray, Extension Entomologist from the University of Illinois. I'm Todd Gleason.